Today is June 4, 2017, and today is the festival of Shavuot, more commonly known as Pentecost. Before we begin, let us talk to our Heavenly Family. Eloheinu, Heavenly Family, thank you so much for another wonderful feast. Thank you for these times of refreshing. Please bless us. Enable us to understand what you are doing on our behalf and to receive the blessings from it. Guide us in this discussion now to better understand the significance of this feast and help us to gain the experience that you want us to gain. So bring this to be the best meeting it can be. Todah, Chokmah, wisdom. We ask this, Father, Mother, B'Shem Tzemach, Hu He, in the name of branch, he and she. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so first, I just want to ask you guys, and feel free to reply and mention different things. I would like to know what comes to your mind when you think of Pentecost.
Entering into the community.
Okay, entering into the community. Excellent. What else?
The coronation of Jesus in heaven, taking his mediatorial position.
Excellent. Anything else from anyone?
The Holy Spirit coming down on all the disciples and apostles.
Certainly. Yes, another one.
Two wave lobes.
Yeah.
The law being spoken at Mount Sinai.
The law being spoken about Sinai, that's another one. Anyone else?
If you have time, I'd like you to go into the details of what Teresa mentioned, so I'll know how that pertained whenever it's the right time.
Okay, we may end up discussing that more, but the general idea is that Pentecost is when the law was given on Mount Sinai. So you probably already gathered that from what she said, but
at the Exodus, the story.
Yeah.
All right, Pentecost, bringing in the sheaves.
Bring in the sheaves, okay. So it's the completion of the wheat harvest, and so hey, celebration, bringing in the sheaves. Okay, cool. Anything else from anyone else?
A time of rejoicing and thanksgiving.
Excellent.
Another aspect is the betrothal of Christ and wisdom.
Yeah, that's something that Lois talks about, for sure, along with the marriage as an event yet future.
Right.
Yeah.
Pentecost was also the day that the 3,000 were converted in one day, which is part of that two-wave loaf image.
Yeah. I know everyone's racking their brains, but still, I'll just see it. Does anyone have anything else?
This is building on what Mary said, but she said entering into the community, and of course, the aspect that I think of in connection with that is the taking of oath.
Which is, of course,
the covenant.
Yes, but the word oaths is actually one of the meanings of the word Shavuot. And so Shavuot is the name of this festival, and Shavuot in Hebrew means either weeks or oaths. And so it's the Feast of Weeks or the Feast of Oaths.
There's going to be a Latter-day Pentecost, which will show an even greater outpouring of the Holy Spirit's power, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so far as we know, will there be one significant antitypical Latter-day Pentecost or two?
Two.
Two, yeah. We know of two of them, one in the wilderness and one in the promised land. And one in the promised land, of course, is the one that we usually think of, and then the one in the wilderness is the one that is less known, but Ben Roden wrote quite a bit on the subject. And do you guys remember there are a couple of significant elements that he brought out in connection with that Pentecost that haven't really been mentioned yet, but that might lead you guys to remember it? So I'll mention that one, and I'll kind of bring those couple elements. I was thinking of it as two elements, but I'll join it together since they're so related. The establishment of a theocratic nation. So theocracy being the form of government and the establishment of the nation itself, that's a Pentecost event. And so on Mount Sinai, Israel became a nation, or I should say at Mount Sinai, Israel became a nation and was established under a theocratic government, which means, of course, they weren't communist or democratic or, some other form of government. They were theocratic in nature, which means that God was their ruler and God ruled through a representative. So you have the visible king and the invisible king whom he represents. So that's another very significant event, the birth of the nation. So that's one of the primary things that Pentecost is remembered for. And, of course, Christians look at it as the birth of the Christian church, which, of course, it wasn't, because it was a Nazarene movement, the Jewish Nazarene movement, which existed from Jesus beginning to teach and so on in the year 27. And this was just a significant event which established government in the Nazarene movement, which established an order that that really moved the movement forward, that's for sure. It became far more organized from that point on. But, it existed from before that point. But either way, it's just like the children of Israel. They, of course, existed prior to the Feast of Pentecost and the Sinai experience, but they were organized at that point. So organization under a theocratic government, that's what took place with Israel, and something similar took place for the Nazarene movement in the year 31 of the Common Era. So, unless anyone has anything else to mention, we'll kind of move on from that point. But I'm glad that you guys mentioned all the things that you did. That's quite a number of things. Of course, some things that weren't mentioned specifically are kind of implicit within the things that were mentioned, like the idea of unity and so on. We know that that's part of the emphasis of Pentecost because of the experience of the disciples and all of that. But kind of interesting that no one mentioned the Noahcic Pentecost and the Abrahamic Pentecost. What do you guys think of that?
I have never heard of those.
That's probably why then. Yeah, it's so I don't expect anyone, or I really didn't expect anyone to have mentioned the Noahcic and Abrahamic Pentecost, because it's something that we really haven't really focused on or looked at before, and it's not in the Protestant canon. It's not the sort of thing which would be typically thought of. But it's interesting to realize that our lack of cognizance of that idea was not shared by all Jews in the past. And so we'll talk about that a little bit, though it's not necessarily going to be, the primary focus of this study. Although I can't say for sure. I don't know exactly where our sister will lead us in all of this. But I wanted to start out with kind of, all of us reminding ourselves of what Pentecost is about. What we already know about Pentecost. And from all the things that you guys mentioned, it's quite full of meaning. I mean, there's a whole lot there. Of course, for most Christians, it's just simply about the establishment of the church and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. But really, there's a lot there, and some of the things that you guys mentioned are things that, I'm sure people listening to this study later, just someone, surfing through YouTube and coming across this study, and first thing I ask, hey, what comes to your mind when you think of Pentecost? Entering the community. People are going to be like, what? And quite a number of things. The coronation of Christ into his mediatorial kingdom. It's kind of surprising. But we've been privileged with a knowledge of some of these things, and of course some of it is part of our current ongoing investigation of the community rule, and that's one thing which we really do need to understand, because as we've seen in our previous studies, this covenant renewal ceremony was done every year, most likely on the Feast of Pentecost, and there are other reasons for that, which we'll probably get into. And we really need to know the deal with this, because, it's just, we need to be organized. Pentecost is a decided change. The children of Israel, when they had their Pentecost event, they became an organized nation. And they had a huge amount of potential, and obviously they actually did become a nation and had a long history as ancient Israel before they were scattered and brought into captivity and all of that. If it wasn't for that event, though, or any sort of similar event, then they would have never become a nation. Likewise, Pentecost, 31 AD, that was so significant. It was just really a significant event, and things were not the same after that event that established the movement in an organized form, the Nazarene movement, that is, and they were able to march forward triumphantly. The community rule gives a very organized system, and evidently membership within that system would be, in a sense, renewed every year, just how Victor Houghton renewed the Davidian membership every year. And there's this covenant ceremony, and it always keeps people mindful of the principles of truth and righteousness and our dependence upon our heavenly family and all of that. So this is a very significant feast. And today, as I have been contemplating this feast, and I have been reading some things and praying to our heavenly family, asking them, like, okay, what are we supposed to be going through in this meeting? And I was just honestly saddened by the fact that this Pentecost is not the Pentecost that it could be. Here we're learning information. We are, we're going to expand our perspectives and all of that. But there must come a Pentecost where we really do it right. And if this whole idea set forth in the community rule is correct, and once again, so far, over the past, I guess it's been well over a year now, year and a half or so. I don't remember exactly when we started studying the community rule. Well, actually, I think I do. It was actually the new moon of the 7th. No. It was like the new moon of the 8th month or something like that.
I'm going back to try to find out.
Yeah, 2015 in the 7th or 8th month. Because the new moon of the 7th month, we started talking about ritual purity. And then I think it was the 8th month, Qumran and the line of truth. So, anyway, it's been, again, like a year and a half or even more that we've been studying this. And I'm sure...
October.
Okay, yeah, October. It was the new moon of the 8th month. Yeah, so I'm sure you guys have noticed that the various new moon meetings that we've had and the various things that we've studied over time throughout this year and a half plus are all supportive of what we've been finding in the community rule. I mean, we definitely can see that the teacher of righteousness is a true prophet. We can definitely see that the Thanksgiving hymns are a product of inspiration. And I think that we can say the same concerning the Odes of Solomon. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's absolutely amazing literature right there, the Odes of Solomon. And, this is all in that particular strain of ancient Jewish literature. And, of course, more things could be mentioned, but we're seeing more and more the importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And, as we were studying this, too, it was also amazing to find Lois Roden talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls and how we have to be open to the documents there. And she talked about how John the Baptist was an Essene, and, really kind of amazing to see how she was at least thinking in that direction and mentioned it in one study that we have an audio cassette of. So, and of course, if anyone isn't familiar with what I'm talking about, you can just search it on the Seven Angels Messages YouTube channel. Just type in Lois Roden and you'll come across it, as we put an audio clip of her commenting upon the subject in a separate little YouTube video. So anyway, I recognize that we're not yet at the point of understanding of the community rule and the point of investigation where we can, act with knowledge on the subject. But in light of everything that we've gone through, it sure does look like we're heading in that direction, I mean, if the community rule isn't, a significant part of what our Heavenly Family is trying to do, well, then, man, something a whole lot like it sure has to be. I mean, we, so far, regardless of what we find for, like, let's say we get into column 5 of the community rule, and it's like, whoa, this is totally something messed up that we cannot agree with. Well, at that point, seriously, that would not discount the previous columns necessarily, because, hey, they may have originally been separate writings that were compiled together. Those are things that we have to investigate. That we'll talk about it more when we get to column 5, which, of course, we'll get there pretty soon. And there's just, I mean, the truths that are in the community rule that we have already read, that we can verify to be truth, once something is shown to be truth, nothing can discredit it as being true. Even if the community rule itself is not a product of inspiration, and even if the rest of the community rule is totally bogus, well, we know that the teaching of the light-darkness paradigm and so on came from the teacher of righteousness. We know that from the Thanksgiving hymns, and we know that this is an expression of his teachings, whether he wrote it or not, what we find in the community rule. So it's like, oh, man, so far we've been able to really wholeheartedly agree with everything, and it's been more than, oh, yeah, I agree with that, of course. It's been eye-opening. It's been wonderful. And it's really been thought-provoking and guided us to understand certain principles that we might not have understood as clearly without the community rule, or perhaps not at all. So, I mentioned this to let you guys know what was going through my mind before the meeting, in just the recognition of the fact that, oh, man, one Feast of Pentecost, maybe next year, will be bringing into action some of the things that we are now learning only in theory. And so we need to be preparing for that. And part of that is remembering all of what Pentecost is about. In order to really experience a Pentecost, we have to at least come into some degree of unity. Mm-hmm. We really have to. And I think we need to be devoting our time during this next year to really coming into unity in our purpose, in our headship under our Heavenly Family, and also in terms of things like the community rule. We really all need to, investigate it. And the wonderful thing about all this, when I'm talking about coming into unity, our Heavenly Family's idea of unity and how to obtain it is so great, because it's not about compromise.
Mm-hmm.
It's about truth.
That's a difficult one to get around to get used to. I mean, it's just been so ingrained that that's the nice thing to do, is to settle and compromise. I mean, how can you have a successful marriage without compromise?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, but that's not the idea. It's not supposed to be about compromise. And we really need to get a higher view of unity and how to obtain it. Really, what our Heavenly Family wants is each of us as individuals to come to an understanding of the principles of reality. And in doing so, and to all have a love for the truth. And in doing so, we will be united, because it won't be about one person defending an opinion against another. It will be about everyone simply wanting to know and follow truth. And we all can put anything on the table, and it's fine. There was a quote I came across earlier today. I don't know if I'll be able to pull it up right now. I probably won't, but I think after the meeting, I'll post it on the Branch Davidian SDA Facebook group. It's a quote from Ellen White where she says something along the lines of how the sincere seeker for truth will be totally fine with having his ideas open to investigation and criticism.
Mm-hmm.
And he will not be annoyed if someone crosses his idea. You know, he'll be totally fine with that, totally happy with that. Why? Well, that's the case for anyone who really does love truth and only truth, not just a pet theory. You know, not their idea of what they think is true, not the content of my belief system. No, truth itself, whatever it may be. And so if we have that perspective, we can put anything on the table. Anyone can bring up anything, and anyone can challenge it in any way, and no one's going to fight over it. Everyone's going to say, oh, okay, yeah. You know, if someone mentions a certain idea, someone might say, well, is that really true? Have you thought of this and that? And oh, no, I haven't really thought of that. Maybe that does discredit this idea. Let's investigate it and really find out. You know, I mean, it can be as simple as that. And that's how we have to really approach things in order to obtain unity. If everyone has a certain idea that they want to hold on to, then we're not going to go very far. So we have to be open to, this is another quote actually I came across from Ellen White. It's one that more of you will be familiar with. She says that those who think that they will never have to give up a cherished view will be disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, come on, we have to be humble, right? I mean, we can't imagine that all of our cherished views are right. How unrealistic is that? So we have to be open to being corrected and be humble enough to view things differently. And we might have a view that we might cherish a lot, but why do so? And why allow something that we happen to like to hold us back if it's not true anyway? So these ideas are really... Sorry, someone wanting to make a comment?
Oh, I was just going to say, it reminds me of something you said as I was studying today. I was studying that YouTube thing that Teresa sent out, Annual Renewal. So you had said, and I'm going to quote you because I wrote it down. It says, someone who has trained themselves in the ways of error and ingrained themselves in it more deeply will have a more difficult time in advancing. The more we advance in all things good now, that will determine where we will be in our relationship to other members of the kingdom and our relationship to Christ. So basically that my mind's going to that quote that you said as you're talking about this topic.
Wonderful. Thank you for mentioning that. That highlights the everlasting implications of this. So we all have to grasp these principles and really get on board with truth as a principle. And that will determine a whole lot of what happens now and what happens in eternity hereafter. So here's the thing. In recognizing where we need to go, we really need to keep these things in mind, because, this Pentecost isn't the Pentecost that we're really looking for. It's not to say that that's by divine decree and that it couldn't have been different. No, it's just saying, hey, this is where we're at right now. We're not at the place where we need to be, but we can get there. And the reality of it is that I have no inkling of any sort of genuine reason there might be why we can't be there for next year. Mm-hmm. We just need to arise, shake ourselves from the dust, and sit down already,
Amen.
We really need to take this message seriously, and that's what our Heavenly Family wants. Teresa has been editing some of the Ellen G. White pamphlet studies that we had on social meetings, and, sometimes I'll hear some of it as she's editing. And some of these studies, by the way, are on YouTube already if you guys haven't seen them. But in those meetings, we talk a lot about the need to be active. And after Teresa had been editing one of these studies and I heard some of it, I was just thinking, and I realized that, our Heavenly Family needs a movement of activists.
Yeah.
And seriously, our Heavenly Family requires everyone who will be a part of this movement to be an activist in terms of proclaiming truth and living truth. And there is no other way to do it, really. And so seriously, you guys all need to take it seriously that you need to become active. You need to make this message your whole life, your purpose, your everything, or else not be a part of it at all. That's what it will eventually happen.
That's what I was going to say. That's just the way it'll happen.
Yeah, no, that is just the way it'll happen. It's not like I'm going to say, oh, you're not meeting your quota for activity, therefore you're out, you're kicked out or something like that. That's not, how it's really going to happen. It's just simply that, look, we can't afford to sit back and not do anything. We can't afford to take this religion as most people take all other religions. No, this isn't like other religions. Seriously, if someone wants a religion where they are satisfying their appetite for curiosity about biblical things, you can find that elsewhere. Yeah, it's true. You won't learn as much about the Bible. Yeah, you won't get the same information you're getting here. And I'm sure, obviously, everyone who's here wants to get the information you're getting here. But it's not just about getting this information. This is calling us to something different. We need to be like a different nation. And we can't be like a whole new nation if we're just simply doing the things that everyone else does. Or just doing everything that everyone else does other than when it comes to meetings and holy days. No, we really have to do something totally different. And our Heavenly Family does want to bring us soon as possible, really, to the point where we are all firmly united on truth, and where we can genuinely enter into a covenant with our heavenly family. Now, this everlasting covenant has arrived. It has come, but it's not the sort of thing where it's like, oh, it's here. Now everyone's just a part of it, and we're all moving forward, and so on. No. We need to enter into the everlasting covenant and renew the covenant and, according to the community rule, it's an annual thing. And it's a scriptural idea to come back. I mean, it's the Feast of Oaths, right? So our Heavenly Family really does want to bring us to enter into covenant with them and to become a well-organized body. Like, seriously, this is, like a non-violent military operation that our Heavenly Family is trying to bring about. Because, guys, we need to take this war seriously. This is a war between truth and falsehood, between life and death, between light and darkness. And the world is suffering so badly. We really need to do something different. And, that's where our Heavenly Family is trying to lead us. This is an activist movement. It is a revolution. Again, this is not an anti-government revolution. It's not a violent revolution. It's not a revolt in that sense. It's a revolution in that it is a paradigm-shifting, immense change. It's a social revolution. It's a theological revolution, an ideological revolution. And anyone who sees it from outside can easily recognize it as such. And I've mentioned examples before of people who, upon hearing, a few minutes worth of this message, have even called, this is something revolutionary. This is like the birth of a whole new field of thought or something. Like, that's what outsiders call it. For hearing it for 8 minutes, we're just, frogs in heating water. If we don't realize how amazing and revolutionary this message is, and if we're not stirred to action by hearing it, we need to realize that it's kind of like the issue that Mary brought up yesterday about, why is sin pleasurable and desirable and so on. Well, the fact is it's not. It's just that we have been conditioned. So it's the same with this. It's just like watching a child grow up. You don't really notice day by day the changes that are taking place. But then you suddenly see them without seeing them for a while, and it's like, oh, wow, this kid has really grown up. Or you look at a picture from 6 months ago, and it's like, wow, okay, a lot has changed. That's kind of like the development of the message and the coming to awareness of the message. At first, we don't realize how different it is from what we thought prior to coming to it. We don't realize how different it is, and then as it develops, it's like, okay, yeah, we see each point gradually as we come along, and our Heavenly Family leads us on from step to step. And sometimes we need to sit back and realize, wow, okay, if you really compare what the message really is, like as we know it today, to what we actually thought 5 or 10 years ago, or to what other religions put forward, wow, this is totally different. And we need to realize how it's like, oh, wow, we're on something here. This is something incredible. So we need to get ready for next Pentecost.
Amen.
And we need to put away all of our useless distractions in life. We need to be preparing ourselves for a well-organized state of things. And the way that we need to do that is by putting ourselves to action right now. Each one of us has an individual responsibility. And each one of us has talents that our Heavenly Family has given us. And I know that some of you guys are putting your talents to use. And it's great. It's wonderful. Some of you guys are, putting your artistic skills to use. And it's great stuff. Some of you have musical skills and are putting them to use. And some of you are gaining new skills. Like Teresa, she says that she couldn't draw before.
Oh, no. I couldn't draw.
Yeah. Well, she can now, guys. And guess what? It just happened that one day there was a piece of art that needed to be made, and, no one had replied in doing it. And I know that other people were already working on other things anyway. So it's not just to say, oh, well, everyone was just negligent or something like that. No, we recognize that other people were working on other pieces of art and things like that. But Teresa was like, okay, well, this needs to be done, so I'm going to do it. And she felt impressed by her Heavenly Family. She felt a burden to accomplish that task, and so she set out to do it. And it was great. I mean, the end result is wonderful. It's you can see the picture. We have a video study about water purification rituals and
Antitypical ritual purity.
Antitypical ritual purity. Yeah, so it's a recent video on the YouTube channel, and the picture ended up being awesome. And I know, Mary is learning to play guitar, and I know that here at the LBC, we get together and play music, and, I'm seeing people improve with their musical skill very quickly. And music is one of the things that's so important for bringing the message out there. Like, if we want to be activists, yeah, let's be musical activists. Let's be art activists. Why? Because art is a means of communication, and this being a social and ideological revolution, man, what better way than to communicate it through art? That's right. Let's do all these things. Let's really get into it. And as we do, we'll be in more communication with each other. We'll need to correspond and oh, well, I'm doing this. Okay, you're doing that. Okay, well, let's help each other out. You can make this song, and I'll draw a picture to illustrate it, and then we can make a YouTube video and put it out there. Whatever. I mean, we can collaborate. And as we do that, organization will start to kind of emerge from that. And then it'll be at a point where, yeah, we can really bring about the organization that needs to be. Really, better put, our Heavenly Family will look at it and say, okay, I can now establish organization with these people because they are willing. Up till now, it's just, our Heavenly Family has known that if they say, okay, guys, here's organization. Well, organization requires upkeep. It requires dedication. It requires devotion. It requires discipline. And if no one does it, well, that organization is going to fall apart. It's just not going to remain organized. It's going to just dissipate. And then we'll, be basically doing the same thing that we're doing now, which is good. It's necessary. What we're doing now is great. We need to learn the message and all of that. And I know, there are people here who are really starting to become more active. And so I want to encourage all of you who are to continue with that. But for any who are not, I really want to encourage you to begin. And why not? We only have so many years in life, and hopefully we can bring it about so that Christ can come back in our generation. But if we don't do anything about it, guess what? He won't. And our years will pass us, and we'll die. And if that happens, what a shame it would be to be at the end of your life, in your old age, and look back and say, oh, man, I didn't really do anything. I didn't change the world. Man, no. We can't do that. We have to live in such a way that whether we live or whether we die, we change the world.
Amen.
That needs to be our keynote. Whether we live or whether we die, we change the world. I know that I am personally determined to change the world. Seriously, even if none of you guys join me, I know that some of you have, and and some of you guys are devoted to this too. But I'm just saying that it's important for each of us to take that personal responsibility and say, hey, even if no one joins me, I am going to change the world by the grace of our Heavenly Family. And even if that change is not manifested in our lifetime, we can change it. Ellen White has changed the world and will change the world all the more. Her works do follow her, as do those of the other pioneers. And, these writings have a huge impact on us today and are a large part of bringing about this great change. I mentioned her just as an example. Well, you know what? If she didn't devote her life to the message that she had been given, we'd be more than 70 years behind. 70 years was the duration of her ministry, but she advanced things a lot. So, in consideration of our present state and where we need to go, that's the main thing to keep in mind, that we need to really take this all seriously, and we need to prepare for next Pentecost, and in order to do so, we need to live each day to the fullest.
Amen.
Yeah, amen. So I know we haven't really read anything yet, and I know I mentioned the Abrahamic Pentecost and the Noahcic Pentecost, so maybe we'll get into that a little bit. But before we kind of, look at a couple other things here, does anyone have comments or questions in regard to what we've been discussing so far?
I do just want to say, compared to last Pentecost, like in all honesty, last Pentecost, I was really freaked out by the community rule. I'm just being honest. I was just like, I don't think I would be good in the community, and it scared me. It scared me to death. And this year, I'm just not afraid of it anymore. I can see how, the only path to righteousness is love, and the community is just the result of everyone loving each other, and it's just reality. And so I just wanted to praise the Heavenly Family for helping me in my mind and heart get to that place. And I'm sure by next year, I'm sure I have more to go in that area, but by next year, hopefully it'll be easy to take the vow, just like when I got baptized to be a Seventh-day Adventist. I just couldn't wait to do it, and it was just one of the greatest joys of my life, and I look forward to that same experience as entering into the community, hopefully.
Yeah, amen.
Amen.
Awesome. Anyone else have comments or questions? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these other elements then in regard to Pentecost that we haven't really been all too familiar with, the Noahcic and the Abrahamic Pentecosts. And before we read the passages in relation to this, I just want to mention a few things in terms of lead up or background information on this. So what we're going to read is from a writing known as the Book of Jubilees. This is a writing which needs to be investigated. I myself do not know the true character of the Book of Jubilees in terms of whether or not it is a product of inspiration, whether or not it claims to be a product of inspiration, who wrote it, when exactly it was written, and all of that sort of thing. So this is something that needs to be investigated. However, there are some things about the Book of Jubilees which are quite intriguing. One thing that should catch our attention right off the bat is that it was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, that's rather interesting. So the Qumran community evidently found it valuable enough to at least have, or at least they had some sort of interest in it. But more than that, they actually refer to it within their writings. So there's a text which we've talked about before, the Damascus document, which of course we don't agree with everything in the Damascus document. It's the one that instructs people not to help an animal out of a pit on the Sabbath. And it clearly comes from a later period in the community's development as compared to the Thanksgiving hymns and the community rule. The Damascus document, in fact, refers to the teacher of righteousness as someone who arose in the past. So it may be that this is post-teacher of righteousness era Qumran literature. And that being the case, we can at least keep in mind the possibility that this comes from an apostate Qumran movement. Because, after all, how many times has it been that a prophet dies and the leader who followed the prophet did not pretty much immediately go into sin and abandon the truth and really apostatize and so on? Well, that really has not happened many times. So most of the time it's the opposite. But still, it's a very important writing, the Damascus document, in terms of understanding the history of the movement and things about the teacher of righteousness. And it has some very important things to say. One of the things that it says, this is from the main manuscript of the Damascus document, known as CD, in column 16, lines, I'll start reading line 1 to 4. I'll read 5 too, 1 to 5. Therefore, one will impose upon himself to return to the law of Moses, for in it all is defined, and the exact interpretation of their ages about the blindness of Israel in all these matters. Behold, it is defined in the book of the divisions of the periods according to their jubilees and their weeks. And on the day on which one has imposed upon himself to return to the law of Moses, the angel Mastema will turn aside from following him, should he keep his words. Okay. This is a reference to the Book of Jubilees. And the title here, of course, is a longer title. It's the Book of the Divisions of the Periods according to their Jubilees and their weeks. So that's how they referred to this book. But it's the Book of Jubilees. And one of the reasons why we know that is because, well, the title is pretty much the same as the other ancient titles for the Book of Jubilees. For example, and there's actually several different titles, but they all have the same basic meaning. The Ethiopic starts out, this is the account, so this is the title, the account of the division of the days of the law and the testimony for annual observance according to their weeks of years and their jubilees throughout all the years of the world. Kind of a long title for a book, but that's what it's called. And it's definitely referring to the Book of Jubilees just by looking at the title that it gives here in the Damascus document, but also right after that it says, and on the day on which one has interposed upon himself to return to the law of Moses, the angel Mastema will turn aside from following him, should he keep his words. Well, the angel Mastema is the name of a certain angel in the Book of Jubilees. So it's definitely referring to Jubilees. There are also other things earlier in the Damascus document that vaguely allude to certain ideas and phrases that are found in the Book of Jubilees. So this is showing that the Qumran community obviously found the Book of Jubilees to be important in some way. Also, the Book of Jubilees is in the canons of the Ethiopian Jews, Beta Yisrael, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And those groups of believers certainly have a lot more in common with Essene Judaism than other types of Judaism and Christianity. And of course, they have the Book of Enoch and other writings in their canons as well, which were also found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Also, the Book of Jubilees certainly has connections with the Book of Enoch and the Genesis Apocryphon and the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs and the Qumran sectarian literature. There's a lot of connection between these texts. They share a lot of ideas and so on. And, you know, a lot of people think that the Book of Jubilees was written within the Qumran community. Some think that maybe it was before the sharp split with the Hasmoneans and, you know, different things like that. But it definitely has a lot there that is very, very much like the sorts of things that we find in the sectarian literature, to the point where it's a question as to whether or not it is sectarian or whether it preceded the community for sure. And if it did precede the community, by how long and in what sense? Was it just part of the community before it really developed to be as distinct as it became, or what? So I mention these things just to say that the Book of Jubilees is important and it's worth investigating. It's in this whole line of tradition that we have been studying. You know, everything from the Thanksgiving hymns to the Odes of Solomon and all of these things that have that kind of Qumran effect. They're all good. So, evidently, Qumranites, if we can call them that, read the Book of Jubilees. They had it, they quoted it, they referenced it in other writings, and it was important to them in some way. Whether or not it's a product of inspiration, it is important for us to read in order to understand what they had going through their minds. Also, one of the most devoted and earliest scholars of so-called pseudepigraphal literature, a man by the name of R.H. Charles, not to be confused with James Charlesworth, but R.H. Charles, he did a lot of research on pseudepigrapha and apocrypha and different things like that, and he wrote a book on the Book of Jubilees and concluded that certainly the authors of the New Testament were aware of it, and there are quite a number of parallels between the Book of Jubilees and the New Testament, And, among certain groups of Christians, it was accepted for however long. It lasted different periods of time among different groups. Obviously, it lasted longest among Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, because they still have it today. So, the Book of Jubilees essentially claims to give a record of a revelation that God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai. And it doesn't claim to be written by Moses. It speaks of Moses in third person, but it does talk about Moses writing things down. So within the Book of Jubilees, God commands Moses to write certain things down. So it's kind of like the Pentateuch in that regard. But part of the revelation that is given to Moses is a telling of the history of the world from creation up until his day. Well, that's very similar to what people think who believe that, in rabbinic tradition, for instance, the idea was that Moses had a revelation of the Torah, the whole Pentateuch, on Mount Sinai. And that's how we got the Pentateuch, according to rabbinic tradition, is that Moses got a revelation of the history of the world, and then he wrote the Pentateuch as we have it. Of course, that isn't true, as we have found in previous studies. But the idea of a revelation of the history of the world on Mount Sinai is shared between rabbinic tradition and also the Book of Jubilees. Like I said, I don't know whether that's true or not. This is something to investigate. But I wanted to mention it as, letting you know kind of the broad outline of the book. So it has this talk of this revelation, and then it basically tells the revelation from creation until Sinai. And in doing so, of course, it tells the stories of Adam and Noah and Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and so on, up until Moses. Now, in chapter 6 of the Book of Jubilees, it's talking about Noah and the flood, and introduces the festival of Shavuot, and has some interesting comments on it. So, Heavenly Family, guide us to gain a correct understanding of what we are about to read. Todah. Thank you. Okay, so Jubilees chapter 6. And on the first of the third month he went out of the ark, and he built an altar on that mountain. And he made atonement for the land. And he took the kid of a goat, and he made atonement with its blood for all the sins of the land, because everything which was on it had been blotted out, except those who were in the ark with Noah. And he offered up the fat upon the altar, and he took a calf, a goat, a lamb, kids, salt, a turtle dove, and a young dove, and he offered up a burnt offering on the altar. And he placed upon them an offering kneaded with oil. And he sprinkled wine, and placed frankincense upon everything. And he offered up a sweet aroma, which was pleasing before the Lord. And the Lord smelled the sweet aroma, and made a covenant with him, so that there might not be floodwaters which would destroy the earth. All the days of the earth, seed time and harvest, will not cease. Cold and heat and summer and winter and day and night will not change their ordinances or cease forever. But as for you, increase and be multiplied on the earth, and become many upon it, and become a blessing upon it. Fear and terror of you I will set upon everything which is on the land or in the sea, And behold, I have given you all the beasts, and everything which flies, and everything which moves upon the earth and in the water, and fish and everything, for food, like green herbs. And I have given you everything so that you might eat. But flesh, which is filled with life, that is, with blood, you shall not eat, because the life of all flesh is in the blood, lest your blood be sought for your lives. From the hand of every man, from the hand of every creature, I will seek the blood of a man. Whoever pours out the blood of a man, by man his blood shall be poured out, because in the image of the Lord he made Adam, or mankind. And as for you, increase and become many in the land. And Noah and his sons swore that they would not eat any blood which was in any flesh. And he made a covenant before the Lord God forever in all of the generations of the earth in that month. Therefore, he spoke to you so that you also might make a covenant with the children of Israel. So now this is speaking to Moses, and I believe it's the angel of the presence who's giving this revelation to Moses and speaking to Moses, saying, Therefore, he spoke to you so that you also might make a covenant with the children of Israel with an oath in this month upon the mountain. And ye will sprinkle blood upon them on account of all the words of the covenant which the Lord made with them for all time. This testimony is written concerning you, so that you might keep it always, lest you ever eat any blood of the beasts or birds or cattle throughout all the days of the earth. And the man who eats the blood of the beasts or cattle or birds throughout all the days of the earth shall be uprooted, he and his seed, from the earth. And you command the children of Israel not to eat any blood, so that their names and seed might be before the Lord God always. And there is no limit of days to this law, because it is forever. They shall keep it for their generations, so that they might make supplication on your behalf with blood before the altar on every day. And at the hour of daybreak and in evening, they will seek atonement on their own behalf continually before the Lord, so that they might guard it and not be uprooted. And he gave a sign to Noah and his children, that there should not again be a flood upon the earth. He set his bow in the clouds for a sign of the covenant which is forever, that the water of the flood should therefore not be upon the earth to destroy it all the days of the earth. Therefore, it is ordained and written in the heavenly tablets that they should observe the festival of Shavuot in this month, once per year, in order to renew the covenant in all respects, year by year. And all of this feast was celebrated in heaven from the day of creation until the days of Noah, 26 jubilees and 5 weeks of years. And Noah and his children kept it for 7 jubilees and 1 week of years, until the day of the death of Noah. And from the day of the death of Noah, his sons corrupted it, until the days of Abraham, and they ate blood. But Abraham alone kept it, and Isaac and Jacob and his sons kept it until your days. But in your days the children of Israel forgot it, until you renewed it for them on this mountain. And you command the children of Israel, so that they might keep this feast in all their generations as a commandment to them. 1 day per year in this month they shall celebrate the feast, for it is the feast of Shavuot, and it is the feast of the first fruits. The feast is twofold and of two natures, just as it is written and engraved concerning it, observe it. This is because I have written it in the book of the first law, which I wrote for you, so that you might observe it in each of its appointed times, 1 day per year. And I have told you its sacrificial offering, so that the children of Israel might remember them and observe them in their generations in this month, 1 day each year. And then it goes on and actually mentions some other festivals. It says, and let me just see here if it... I won't necessarily read the whole next section here, but it then goes on to talk about how the first of the first month, the first of the fourth month, the first of the seventh month, and the first of the 10th month are days of remembrance and appointed times in the 4 parts of the year. So that's, those are other aspects that the Book of Jubilees mentions. But for our purposes today, this is talking about the establishment of Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Odes. It says that it is twofold and of two natures. And what it's referring to is the fact that it is the Feast of Weeks. That's what Shavuot means, weeks. But Shavuot also means oaths. So it has the idea of renewing the covenant year by year. I mean, that sounds so much like what we read in the community rule. And it's connecting this to the idea of the covenant made with Noah in the 3rd month. And then it says that they kept this feast, the Feast of Pentecost. And, of course, as we just read, it says that it was kept during Noah's life, but after Noah died, his children corrupted it until the days of Abraham, and Abraham alone kept it, and then his children kept it as well, and then it got corrupted again, and then Moses renewed it or restored it. So that's kind of an interesting view, when we think of Pentecost. This sure evidently was not the sort of thing that came to mind. But for the author of the Book of Jubilees, it certainly did come to mind. And for the readers of the Book of Jubilees, including members of the Qumran movement, it would have come to mind. If I had asked that same question to them, they would have thought of Noah, and they would have thought of Abraham, and we'll go and read the section dealing with Abraham next. And they would have connected it very explicitly to this idea of oaths, which, of course, we did. In what you guys mentioned, you did connect it to the idea of oaths and entering the community, making it covenant, and all of that sort of thing, because of reading the community rule. But here it is in the Book of Jubilees, even more explicit, and connecting it all the way back to Noah. So now we'll read the part of this which refers to Abraham, and this is in Jubilees chapter 22. Starting at verse 1. And it came to pass in the first week of this 44th Jubilee, in the 2nd year, that year in which Abraham died, that Isaac and Ishmael came from the well of the oath to Abraham, their father, to observe the feast of Shavuot. So it's interesting that they're at a place called the Well of the Oath, and they came to observe the Feast of Shavuot, which is the feast of the first fruits of the harvest. And Abraham rejoiced, because both of his children came. For Isaac had many possessions in Beersheba, and Isaac used to go and inspect his possessions, and return to his father. And in those days Ishmael came to see his father, and both of them came together. And Isaac slaughtered a sacrifice as a burnt offering, and offered it up upon the altar of his father, which he built in Hebron. And he sacrificed a thank offering, and made a feast of joy before Ishmael his brother. And Rebekah made new round cakes of new grain, and she gave them to Jacob her son, to take to Abraham his father from the first fruits of the land, so that he might eat and bless the Creator of all before he died. And Isaac also sent by the hand of Jacob a good thank offering to Abraham, so that he might eat and drink. And he ate and drank and blessed God Most High, who created heaven and earth, and who made all the fat of the earth, and gave it to the children of men, so that they might eat and drink and bless their Creator. And now I thank you, my God, because you have let me see this day. Behold, I am 175 years old, and fulfilled in days, and all of my days were peaceful for me. The sword of the enemy did not triumph over me in anything which you gave to me, or my sons, all the days of my life until this day. O my God, may your mercy and your peace be upon your servant and upon the seed of his sons, so that they might become an elect people for you, and an inheritance from all the nations of the earth from henceforth, and for all the days of the generations of the earth forever. Okay, so there we have a keeping of the Feast of Pentecost, or Shavuot, in the days of Abraham. And here, of course, it connects it to the new grain, and Rebekah making new round cakes of new grain, and giving them so that Abraham might eat and bless the Creator before he died. So the Book of Jubilees definitely has the Feast of Pentecost going way back to the patriarchal age, and as it said in chapter 6, it even says that it was kept in heaven from creation. So the Feast of Pentecost is obviously viewed as quite important. I'm not sure if there are other accounts of it being kept within the Book of Jubilees or not. I don't remember any others, but it certainly makes that connection. Of course, I'm sure with the way that we're learning to think now, there's a lot of questions in terms of historicity, in terms of the purpose of the author in saying these things, and all of that. It's something to investigate anyway. So I wanted to mention it both for the sake of investigating it on its own right, and also for the sake of getting even more so into the mindset of the teacher of righteousness and his followers. If it's something that he read or considered important, well, that might be important for us to know as well. And so I'm not sure what the situation is with that one way or the other, but I'm sure we'll find out in due time. So does anyone have comments or questions in relation to what we read or anything else that we've been discussing?
Jubilees, you had mentioned what you were just reading there in chapter 22, or maybe it was chapter 6, that the Feast of Pentecost was kept even in heaven from the time of creation till the time of Noah. Was it kept before creation? Even like I read Jubilees like a year ago. It's been a long time, and it seems like I had the impression, although I can't like on page 17, it talks about the Sabbath, that God and the angels kept the Sabbath in heaven before the earth even was. Do you remember anything about that?
I'm not actually sure on that point. I'm not actually even sure of whether Jubilees has a concept of pre-creation, although it may. When I looked at it a little bit earlier again today, and I've read the whole thing before, but I don't remember whether it specifies any sort of pre-creation thing. But one of the things that it mentions in regard to day one of creation is the creation of all the spirits which minister before him. So I'll read this. It's from chapter 2, verse 2. For on the first day he created the heavens which are above, and the earth, and the waters, and all the spirits which minister before him, the angels of the presence, the angels of sanctification, the angels of the spirit of fire, the angels of the spirit of the winds, the angels of the spirit of the clouds and darkness and snow and hail and frost, the angels of resoundings and thunder and lightning, and the angels of the spirits of cold and heat and winter and springtime and harvest and summer, and all of the spirits of his creatures which are in heaven and on earth. So that's kind of interesting. Is it really trying to say that all of those beings came into existence on day one? It seems to be saying that. And so unless there's something within Jubilees that refers to angels being in existence prior to that point, or if it mentions anything prior to that point, then it seems to say that, everything, including angels and all of that, came into existence on day one. Whatever came into existence means to the author of Jubilees. That's another question. That I'll just mention as a side note, that is something that's kind of interesting in Jubilees, comparing the creation account in Jubilees with the creation accounts in particularly in Genesis, since it's most similar to the creation accounts in Genesis. So I'm not sure what all it means. There's certainly differences, certainly discrepancies. If this is really talking about everything coming into being in this 1 week, then it's certainly parallel, at least, to the views of a certain strand of young Earth creationists who believe that really everything, the entire universe, every star, every planet, everything came into existence 6,000 years ago, including angels, including all of that, and literally before then, only God existed, not even time, space, matter, or anything like that. Of course, Seventh-day Adventists have a different view of that, but I'm not sure if that view is shared by the author of Jubilees.
Well, when Mary was mentioning that about I believe she mentioned the Sabbath, if I'm not mistaken, in Jubilees. And so as she was talking and as you were talking, I was kind of thumbing through. And I don't think I ever finished Jubilees, but this part I had read before because I can see some markings. And I was noticing in Jubilees 2 that way over there, under the significance of the Sabbath, let me see if I can call this right. It says line 17, but I think it's still in 2. I think it's still in 2. Okay, I need some help. Oh, yeah, it is 2. Okay.
Yeah.
So then where it says, starting right there, it mentions the Sabbath, And I thought that was really interesting right there, because it does make it sound like it may have been in existence before. What do you think?
Well, I guess we should read it and see what it has to say. Do you want to read it, or do you want me to read it?
Oh, it's either way. You go ahead.
Okay, sure. So Jubilees chapter 2, verse 17. And he gave us a great sign, the Sabbath day, so that we might work 6 days and observe a Sabbath from all work on the seventh day. And he told us all of the angels of the presence and all of the angels of sanctification, these two great kinds, that we might keep the Sabbath with him in heaven and on earth. And he said to us, Behold, I shall separate for myself a people from among all the nations, and they will also keep the Sabbath. And I will sanctify them for myself, and I will bless them, just as I have sanctified and shall sanctify the Sabbath day for myself, thus shall I bless them. And they will be my people, and I will be their God. And I have chosen the seed of Jacob from among all that I have seen, and I have recorded him as my firstborn son, and have sanctified him for myself forever and ever. And I will make known to them the Sabbath day, so that they might observe it therein a Sabbath from all work. And a sign by which they might keep the Sabbath with us on the seventh day, to eat and drink and bless the one who created all things, just as he blessed and sanctified for himself a people who appeared from all the nations, so that they might keep the Sabbath together with us. And he caused their desires to go up as pleasing fragrance, which is acceptable before him always. There were 22 chief men from Adam until Jacob, and 22 kinds of works were made before the seventh day. The former is blessed and sanctified, and the latter is also blessed and sanctified. One was like the other with respect to sanctification and blessing. And it was granted to the former that they should always be the blessed and sanctified ones of the testimony and the first law, just as he has sanctified and blessed Sabbath day on the seventh day. And then it goes into giving laws for how to keep the Sabbath. But in terms of what it says here, the angels of the presence and the angels of sanctification keeping the Sabbath with him, with God, in heaven and on earth, that certainly implies two different locations for keeping Sabbath, but it doesn't imply that they kept it before creation, especially since it says that the ones who keep the Sabbath are the angels of the presence and the angels of sanctification. And earlier in this chapter it says that they were created on the first day. So it might be that they were not around to keep the Sabbath prior to that.
Yeah, and it kind of sounds like he's saying what he will do, because when you go, Behold, I shall separate for myself a people from among all the nations, and they will also keep the Sabbath, and I will sanctify them for myself, and I will bless them, just as I have sanctified and shall sanctify the Sabbath day for myself. Thus shall I bless them. He mentions for himself a couple, maybe 2 or 3 times. But yeah, it could just be that it was made special at that time, and that at that time it would be observed in heaven and earth. So I don't have any problem with that at all. Anyway, I thought it was interesting that it was there, and I don't know what's that deal about the 22 kinds of things created, but it's all pretty interesting. Like I say, I don't think I ever finished it, so that'll be something I need to get on with.
Sure, it's definitely a very interesting read. You know, like I've mentioned, I myself am not sure exactly what to make of it. I know it has very interesting things in it. You know, but yeah, it's important to investigate and to find out really what its true nature is, and if it is, you know, to offer us some benefit in some way, in what way, and what is the benefit. So this is all part of the broad investigation. Yes, go ahead.
I have another little comment. It doesn't always just strike me, but it is right now. You know, when we're reading something that we're not sure yet who wrote it, and maybe we won't find out in this lifetime even. But, okay, so we say we don't know who wrote something. Well, who would write something like this? What would be their purpose of writing something if it was all, you know, just messed up in a bunch of made up or error mixed in with, I mean, did Satan have certain people writing things just to be found later and people think they're inspired? That's kind of a silly way of putting it, I guess. But anyway, it's like, okay, well, who did write this and why? And not so much who did, but why? What's their purpose in writing something like this? That's all.
Yeah, well, you know, hey, it's a good question to ask. What sort of person would have written this and why? That's definitely a question that we can ask. And basically, I guess the answer that we would get is simply a person who has the perspectives that are expressed in the text, and you know, they'd be writing it in order to spread their perspectives or to teach something that they believe needed to be taught, or, you know, again, it depends on what exactly the genre of the literature is and all of that sort of thing as to their purpose in writing it. But, you know, I think that some of it may be people, you know, like people probably wrote books back then for some of the reasons that people write books today. You know, sometimes you'll find something that's like a novel based on a biblical story. So like today you can go to a Christian bookstore and find a whole bunch of novels, and someone might think, well, what's their purpose in writing this, you know? Well, it might just be that they really like the story and think that they can tell it in a way that will interest people in those stories. And in people writing Christian novels, they probably don't think it happened just like that. You know, they have to make up a bunch of additional stuff in order to make it be an interesting novel and not just a repeat of the text upon which the novel is based. And so, yeah, and there wouldn't necessarily be anything malicious in that. Not that it's all that helpful either, but, you know, it could be the same for some ancient writings if people wanted to tell that same story in such a way as to emphasize different points and principles and lessons that they believe are worth emphasizing. So anyway, any other comments or questions?
I just have to, just on Jubilees, I was just thinking about this morning, about how Eve was talking to the serpent and how a lot of, you know, Christians think, or they'll bring up like, wow, you know, she shouldn't have talked to an animal because animals don't talk and that kind of thing, and kind of criticize Eve for talking to an animal. But in Jubilees chapter 3, verse 28, it's talking about after the fall, it says, on that day was closed the mouth of all beasts, of all cattle and birds, and of whatever walked and whatever moved, so that they could no longer speak, for they had all spoken with one another with lip and with tongue. And yeah, it's really interesting because, and then my friend Joy we were talking about this yesterday, weirdly, and she was saying that, oh yeah, and the donkey spoke, and we think of that as being such an unusual thing, but I wonder if it's just like a restoration of all things kind of indication. And anyone that has a dog, sometimes you swear they're trying to talk to you. You know what I mean? And like maybe they could have before. I don't know. I just read it in Jubilees, and I thought that was really interesting, and what a cool thing to look forward to if that's true. I don't know.
Oh man, yeah, I want to talk to my dog.
Yeah,
right.
We have to teach them English then. But
well, they automatically know any language, honey.
Yeah,
that's just the way it goes.
I'm sure. Yeah, but no, that's something, of course. Yeah, when I first read Jubilees, that kind of stood out to me too. Pretty interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of things, like the whole 22 thing that probably has to do with the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. It also says that Hebrew was the language of creation. That's advocated in Jubilees. But then it says that it was lost, and then angels taught it to Abraham. And so there are different things like that it says. Again, I don't know if any of that is actually true or not. Even if the Book of Jubilees is a product of inspiration, those perspectives on a history may not be accurate. Those are two separate things to investigate for sure. But yeah, really interesting. And if that one is true, man, I will laugh with joy.
Sister White does say someplace, I know I've read it, where Adam communed with nature. That's as far as she ever went. I often wondered, well, how was it telepathy? How did he commune with nature?
Yeah, I don't know if you recall, but we've definitely talked about that one before several times, and I can say it wasn't telepathy, but I don't think. Often people interpret that kind of often people interpret it in some sort of spiritualistic way or something like that, where he has just this like mind-to-mind communication with plants, as if plants had minds and different things like that.
As if they were sentient.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just like, I think what she's talking about is just like, enjoying nature, feeling at one with nature, being a part of it, and like, that sort of more general thing.
Maybe. Yeah. Did you ever hear, I've often wondered if George Washington Carver was a spiritualist. He seemed like, everything I've read of him seemed like he was such a wonderful person. But he made a statement that he could lay down to go to sleep with his head on a cabbage, and the cabbage would tell him all the information about itself. It's like, well, now how could that happen if it wasn't spiritualism? And of course he invented a lot of things with the peanuts. But it just, things like that are kind of curiosities. I never did believe that when I first read it.
Right. So this sort of thing is all to kind of wrap this, kind of to what we were talking about earlier before we ended up reading from Jubilees and everything. These are all the sorts of things that we ought to be able to take any type of idea and put it on the table and come to an understanding of the principles of investigation and truth and how material reality functions and all of that. And I'll just say that there's absolutely zero scientific evidence that cabbages can communicate thoughts and
right.
information and anything like that to people. And I know there's a lot of what I now recognize to be crazy claims out there. And I would definitely classify that one as a crazy claim, not into be disrespectful or anything, but to just say when you compare reality to that claim is pretty far out there. Probably a far more likely explanation is that he had a dream.
Well, I was going to say, he doesn't have to be a bad person. You know, you say, well, I thought of him as a great guy or whatever, and he probably was. And there can be people who genuinely are wanting to try to help people, and they're going about it in ways that are spiritualistic. And so, you know, that's evidently he was either just dreaming or a little off the beam or whatever, or was being used by other beings to give the impression of sentience in produce and things like that. You know, just to lead people kind of down the wrong path.
Mm-hmm. I put it in the category of someone stepping over the line innocently, and I think people can be used to cause others to go down the wrong path that way. Anyway, I just thought I would mention that because of the fact that Sister White said Adam communed with nature, but we're not told how. We're not told to what extent. So,
yeah, I was certainly used that way, right? You said something about people can be used innocently, well, lead people down the wrong path. I mean, I was promoting spiritualism for years as a massage therapist. Honestly, you know, I didn't realize that's what it was. I thought it was all good. I thought it was real and all that, but it wasn't. And I recognized that I was being used in promoting that truth, not by our Heavenly Family, that's for sure. So the only other option is the devil.
Yeah.
That said, we can neither assume positive or negative motivations on the part of anyone. I mean, I know lots of times we want to say, well, I like to look at the positive, so I'm going to view them as having good intentions, when in reality, if we have no evidence for their intentions one way or the other, then we really just simply don't know. Maybe it's positive, maybe it's negative. Of course, we won't assume that it's negative either and treat them like they have negative intentions, but it's just good to keep in mind that it's easy to say, well, since I don't want to assume it's this, I'll assume it's the opposite, when we really don't know. So anyway, any other? We should end our meeting soon and everything, but I just wanted to check if there are any other comments or questions.
I just had one other comment. It's about the Book of Jubilees, and a friend of mine, we were talking recently just about the whole idea of the Heavenly Sister and how that seems such a new and revolutionary idea, but you can see it in the past and what did Jesus believe, and you can just see through reading the Book of Jubilees and in just studying the feasts that there's definitely an unfortunate cycle, but also a cool cycle, a cycle of things progressing, but also a cycle of things, truths being lost and having to be restored. And it's hard, reading the Bible or the Book of Jubilees to kind of figure out when were things lost and when were things restored. But most people today are very opposed to anything being restored. Even though the whole Protestant Reformation is a matter of restoration, and the Adventist movement is a huge restoration. Just obviously of the Sabbath, and of course we can all see that. But there's just a lot to be known about, when the idea of the Heavenly Sister was lost and when it was restored and how did it get lost again. And obviously King Solomon knew about it, but it seems like somewhere between King Solomon and Jesus' day it was lost, because the apostles, or the New Testament books I would say that we have don't seem to really, I guess in some, of course I know that Paul promotes it, and maybe things are just lost in translation, but I don't know, it seems very, very hidden sometimes. So anyway, that was my last comment. Sure,
yeah. And yeah, I would definitely like to know kind of the history of that better myself. Obviously, it was there, the idea was there in some very early stages of things, and then lost, and then, we know for sure that whoever wrote the writing known as Joseph and Essenes understood the idea of the daughter. But I don't know when that was written exactly and by whom, and if that was like kind of a fresh revelation of that truth again, or if it just hadn't been entirely lost. So yeah, this is all part of what we need all these various writings for. It helps us to get the full picture, and getting the full picture is of course so important because the past provides the context for the present. Does anyone else have any other comments or questions? Okay. Well, I'll just kind of mention a few things that I've already mentioned, but just kind of to summarize some of the main things that we should take from this Pentecost meeting. Really, the main thing is to realize that we are not yet where we need to be, and that our Heavenly Family has been and still is doing everything possible to bring us there, but it requires our cooperation. And that we really need to take this message seriously. We really need to devote ourselves to truth and love, and we need to learn to think according to material reality and to start doing things, if we haven't already, to promote truth and love and righteousness. And if we have started to do things already along those lines, to make sure to be devoted to that end. And, to employ our talents to gain new talents and so on. And to keep in mind that we really need to get to the bottom of the community rule. We need to know the truth of the teacher of righteousness. And, if there's anyone here who does not yet have a translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls, please get it. And start reading it, really start diving in. And if you don't have James Charlesworth's 2-volume set called The Old Testament Pseudepigrapha, we highly, highly recommend getting that too. It's rather inexpensive on Amazon, and there's just so much stuff in it. It's like 2,000 pages worth of ancient Jewish writings that are, kind of like essential reading in a sense for anyone who really wants to get into the world of Jesus and the apostles and the Jews prior to their days. So involve yourself in this and really ask yourself the big questions about, what are your priorities? What do you really care about? Do you really care about this message? Do you really want to be free of sin? Do you really want to march forward into the kingdom in this generation? And start thinking realistically as to what you need to do in order to bring that about.
Amen.
Yeah, amen. It's not going to just happen magically.
Yeah, it's not going to happen with a couple people, a couple families or whatever, no longer working out in the world. That's not ever, nobody's ever going to have the time to do what needs to be done to change the world.
Yeah. So set your goals as huge goals and realize that they can be met. It really is not, it's not impossible to change the world. We can change the world, and we must change the world because it must be changed. And if we're not going to do it, who is? We can guarantee someone, but it may not be for the better. So we really do need to be activists in this regard and continue studying the community rule. We'll do it together, but also do it on your own. And really, I really want everyone to make it a serious point to examine how you think about things and to question whether you are still thinking in the same sorts of ways that we've all been thinking for all of our lives. And, don't just say, well, obviously I probably am, and just assume it and just kind of inactively wait for you to realize how how you are thinking in the same old ways, perhaps. Actively search throughout your thinking. Actively search for ways that you might be thinking which are not according to truth. Question, okay, what are things that I still believe that I believed in the past? And the question, is that true? Or as you read something, question, how am I approaching this? Whatever, let's say you go to read the book of Jubilees, read it and ask, as I'm reading this, am I asking the right questions? Am I asking the questions that I need to ask? And seriously, think about it, guys. All of the studies that we've had for a long time now are really lessons in how to study. And so we should all be at least becoming familiar with how to go about studying things to arrive at truth. So, question that. And if you find yourself reading something and kind of judging it off of your preferences, then realize, oh, hey, wait a second. No, that's the wrong type of thinking. I'm going to approach things differently.
There's something I'd like to add to what I said earlier, too. In addition to more people needing to be, more active, that sort of thing, I just want to encourage those who want to be. There may be some who it hasn't really occurred to them to do that or whatever, but I know that there are several in the message who that is their desire, to no longer be working for the world, to be able to support themselves by other means. And I just want to encourage people that if that's what our Heavenly Family is calling you to do, then there will be a way to do it. And to start taking steps, whatever that means, thinking about it, researching, learning, looking into other ways of supporting yourself, whatever. I don't know, but I just mean, hey, it can happen, and as long as we are doing what our Heavenly Family is calling us to do, then we can't help but have success.
Amen. And it can all be so simple with just everyone has skills with something. Just start using the skills that you have to proclaim the truth to others in some way. Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay. If I find myself still contemplating or still not comfortable with the community rule, would that be a wrong way of thinking as coming to as far as we've studied it, coming this far in our study? And anyone else can answer that if anybody else wants to say something too. But I just thought that was a question that popped in my mind as you were talking, Trent. So again, if one finds themselves, I find myself still uncomfortable with the community rule and its aspects, its principles, its laying out, the rules that we're finding out, is that a wrong way of thinking? Is there something wrong there in my thinking?
Well, that's a very good question. And I'll say that it might depend on the reasons that someone has for being uncomfortable with it, and also for which part of the community rule someone might be uncomfortable with. And it also depends on in what sense someone feels uncomfortable with it. Like, for instance, if it's dealing with even if it's not dealing with what I was about to mention, let's say it's just a slight feeling of discomfort that might come across you, but you also recognize, oh, no, that's just a feeling of discomfort that doesn't make sense because we've gone through that and we already know what this is referring to, and it doesn't mean what it may strike me as or whatever. So just a feeling that might come across someone momentarily, but they already know better in relation to it, and so they get rid of the feeling, they push back the feeling. Well, that wouldn't be wrong at all. That would just be, being tempted to feel the wrong way about something which we've already studied. If, on the other hand, it is an uneasy feeling about an aspect of the community rule that we haven't really studied yet, well, then that might be just totally understandable because, well, let's say we read it and it's like, okay, well, why is it, let's just say it's dealing with the judicial section is how I refer to it, the part of the community rule which speaks to what to do in a given circumstance where someone violates the principles of truth and righteousness within the community, or let's say someone slanders the community or slanders a member of it, or someone just does something really wrong, like stealing some of the property of the community or whatever. There's a bunch of different things that are listed, and then it mentions different penalties for violating those principles. So if someone's uncomfortable with that, for example, and that's something that we haven't studied yet, someone would have to question themselves as to why they are uncomfortable with it. Do they have a genuine, valid, truth-based reason for being uncomfortable with it? Or is it that they just don't like the thought of participating in a system that has restrictions and consequences and things like that? And if not, then why? So those are all questions that someone would have to ask themselves. So really the only circumstance in which it would totally make sense for someone to really feel uncomfortable with it for any period of time, rather than just a momentary discomfort which they put off, is if someone really, if there's actually something genuine there for them to feel uncomfortable about. That's where a lasting discomfort makes sense. Or, something that's at least more, I'll just say that's really where it really only makes sense. But I'll say that one might also still feel a certain degree of discomfort about certain sections of the community rule just because of being unsure about what it is. And if someone has that, just one moment. If someone has that lack of surety about it, then, and if they count that lack of surety and that feeling of like, well, I'm not sure if this is really a good thing or a bad thing or a true thing or a false thing, then if that's what we count as discomfort, then I would say that of course is permissible or, whatever, understandable, especially if it's in regard to parts that we haven't gone through. If it is in regard to parts that we have gone through, the problem with that is that there's been many times throughout our community rule studies where we've said, hey guys, what are your thoughts on this? Let's talk about it and all of that. And if someone has some unvoiced problems with sections of the community rule through which we have already gone, then I can say it certainly would have been better for them to have voiced those things. And that, of course, the opportunity is still there. Like, people are still free to voice things, but it wouldn't be right for someone to kind of hold a negativity against the community rule on the sections that we have already gone through, and without having explained why and if they have a valid reason for feeling uncomfortable with it, and we're on a call and everyone's saying, no, this actually makes sense, we agree with this, it wouldn't be right for them to withhold their concerns for the sake of others, and it wouldn't be right for the sake of themselves, because it wouldn't be giving them an opportunity for others to help them to see it in the right light, if indeed they're seeing it in the wrong light. So, those are all different elements. So I couldn't really, I guess, answer it in a straightforward way, because it depends on what they count as discomfort and what they don't. I will say, though, that it wouldn't make sense for anyone to regard any part of the community rule with fear. That wouldn't be a truth-based, love-based approach in regard to it. Like, if that's the sort of discomfort, like a fear-type thing, well, approaching anything from the perspective of fear is not going to help the individual, really. Like, it's to approach it from that perspective, not having really studied it, when you don't know that it's something to be afraid of, would be to just give in to temptations for fear. And that just wouldn't be good. It wouldn't help the person to perceive it in the right way and to come to a knowledge of it, to even know if it's a fearful thing. So, that's basically my comments on that. So, Leroy, you said that you had a comment partway through what I was saying?
Yes. Sister Wisdom would have to be the one guiding it, for one thing, for it to work. And it seems like to somebody just looking at it casually, it looks like these people don't have a life, but they're a team working together, to get something done. So they do have a life. They're doing things, and working together as a team, which is good. Moses coming out of Egypt sounds like a community working together, being led by the Spirit. And even Abraham's family, he could pull an army together out of all the people he had in his family. So seems like a good idea to me, but just there's a lot of things we don't understand about it. Like, it seems like these people are just living together. They don't have a life of their own. But we have talked about things where they did have a life, and they're buying and selling and doing things together, but they do it as a team. So I think that's not all I had to say. I think it might be the answer for what's coming on our world, all the people just running around the streets. It's not safe to sleep in the parking lot, my friend said, because there's so many people that are just roaming around trying to survive. And the Lord is going to help them people somewhere, I think, with the true gospel. And I was thinking the community rule sounds like it could be a good possibility.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree. So did that answer your question, Anna?
Yes, thank you very much.
Wonderful. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to continuing on our community rule studies. And I'll just mention as a heads up also that when we get to the end of column 4, which we're very close to, before getting into column 5, I'm thinking that we might actually read, if I'm remembering correctly, I believe it's the Testament of Asher. So it's one of the testaments of the 12 patriarchs, and it deals with the teaching of the two spirits, or the two ways. And I just think it's very helpful in regard to understanding the overall principle. And since the end of column 4 is the end of the section on the two spirits, I think that's a fitting time to take a little excursion and read the Testament of Asher. So, yeah, that's kind of the last thing I wanted to mention in that regard.
Even the Seventh-day Adventist Church is like a community that they work together, and supposed to anyway, help each other, working together as a team. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, every group of one sort or another has a certain degree of that, and I think that most people, so long as they don't have just a general negative view towards something, can recognize that, the positive benefits of working together and having some degree of community and all of that. So, are there any last comments or questions from anyone?
That's what Satan's trying to stop. He wants to have everybody against everybody. Nobody working with anybody else, breaking marriages, everything.
All right, well, maybe that was the last comment. I just wanted to remind you guys again that there's a quote that I was going to post on the Branch Davidian SDA Facebook group, and I'll be posting it here after the meeting. And also, things that you guys do to promote the message, feel free to share them in the Branch Davidian SDA Facebook group, and we can encourage each other to move forward. I hope soon to be posting some music that I hope will be an encouragement to you guys. And yes, so let's thank our Heavenly Family, and then we'll end the call. Heavenly Family, thank you again for this beautiful day, and thank you for this feast. Thank you for reminding us of these wonderful principles. Heavenly Family, I want to ask that you send your messengers to all the branches here, and please raise them up. Please keep them from getting dragged down by temptation and circumstances, and keep them from being slaves to the trials of life, but help them to rise above them and to take control of their own destiny and to become activists for the cause of truth. Thank you so much, Heavenly Family. Please prepare us for next Pentecost. Please help us to become the people who we need to be to change the world.
Amen.
Thank you so much. We ask these things b'Shem Tzemach. Amen.
Amen.